that. Start recording and get started with another edition of Farm Talk. So, thank you all again so much for being here. I hope Ray will be able to join us. So, we do have Rodney will be able to join us. So, we have the R cubed. Today, we are going to be talking about farm starts and nursery. This is getting about the time of year where you need to start getting prepared for what's going to go in the ground in the spring, unless, of course, you are buying from the Desert Farming Initiative's wholesale program, in which case you don't have to worry about that because you'll get your flats direct. But I wanted to get started with a question on germination, specifically something that I see a lot of discussion about of pre-soaking seed before you put it in the ground. So Ray, Rob, what are the best practices? What are your thoughts? Does it just depend on the plant?
Boy, what a question. Let me start by saying I am following the policies of my late wife, Virginia. She was the one who always did the transplants, and she was also always very successful. So what she used to do works, and I have followed that. And what I can tell you is doing this process of germination with the seed and trying to get them to develop a little kind of tail, little white tail, which would be, the root starting, is something that works sometimes. Sometimes it does not. I did not have success with it to start with last year, and but later on I did. What we do is we count out the number of seeds of whatever type we're going to plant, and then we put them on a wet paper towel, and then fold the paper towel so that the seeds are totally enclosed, and we roll and we seal the edges on it, put them into a plastic little plastic sandwich tray type thing, and then I put them into a larger uh, yeah, what do they call all that stuff? Tupperware. Yeah, Tupperware bin, and then we set that on a warming pad. And what I've found needs to happen is you have to have the warmth consistent year round. So that's kind of where we're going with the seed. And I check it every day, make sure the paper towel has still got some moistness to it. I do not want it to dry out. And we're looking at somewhere between 7 and 10 days for the seed to develop that little root on it. And then from there, we go to planting it in in seedling soil. So that's my start. Rob, how about you?
Thank you so much for that, Ray. Yeah.
We still, if you keep your soil moisture good and the soil temperature is right, when you plant a dry seed, it's going to germinate. And a lot of it does have to do with with soil temperature, I'll go back a little bit. Pretty much when you put a seed in the ground, it's like a fall seeding of cover crops or pasture grass. When the moisture and the temperature are right, those seeds will germinate. Like Indian rice grass, a beautiful little grass. It grows native in this area. The seeds are known to remain viable for 21 years. When you plant a crop, you don't have 21 years to wait, but the foundational point is the same, is that when the soil moisture and the temperature are right, and you have good seed soil contact, in other words, it's planted correctly, then it's going to germinate. And one of the things that also ties in, little seeds just simply don't have a lot of carbohydrates stored to grow a root system and send those first leaves up. Like a bean, will come up from 2 inches under. And, good luck if you plant your lettuce seed 2 inches under. You're not going to get a successful germination. So those principles kind of underlay everything, and we try to save time. And generally, our peas, our beans, we plant them dry. I used to plant our beans, I'd get them moist, and then I'd run them through an inoculant so they'd all have this little nifty little coat of basically bacteria um, that adhered to them, and it would plant them with the seed. Then they gum up in my cedar. And so I did that dry for a while. And now we don't use the inoculant either. We just plant the beans. We've got a lot of microbes in our soil. We just plant them. But if you're trying to get started early, hold on one second here. Oh, I'm still unmuted. Anyway, if you're trying to get going early and your soil temperatures might be a little low, then pre-soaking and starting that germination process where it's warmer is actually a good idea. We sometimes do that with peas, because going out and planting peas in the spring, a lot of times you've still got to wait for the soil to warm up before those peas will germinate. But if you get them soaked and start that process, as Ray was saying, where you start that root formation and they're swollen, they have water, then you can put them in that soil and they'll continue to grow, because soil temperature is not as much of a factor at that point. We generally, long story short, don't pre-soak our seeds. We try and plant when the soil temperature is warm enough for them to just germinate naturally and go.
Anyone have any specific questions that they've dealt with within this category of kind of starts, nurseries, germination?
I could mention a couple of challenges I've had. I mean, I've had trouble with dry seeds with cucumbers and pumpkins and lettuce, and maybe I'm just missing the soil temp. I don't know, but um, yeah, and beans. I mean, I read on beans and they say to start those first, so I've been trying to do that, and with mixed results. So I don't know. I'm just those are my challenges. I want to get started early because I do have trouble with getting pumpkins and melons to be mature, and so that's maybe one of the things. And then outplanting, the starts and when to put the seeds in the ground as far as temperatures go would be good.
Terrific. Yeah, thanks.
Jordan,
Yeah, Ray?
if I could add something at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Rob mentioned soil temperature, and I don't think he emphasized this quite enough. I want to go a little further with it. When you look at the different seeds, they germinate at different soil temperatures. You do not want to plant a melon seed in 45-degree temperature soil. It's not going to do it. The soil temperature has to be somewhere between 60 and 80 degrees for that melon seed to germinate. And the same goes with when we start looking at what seeds we want to plant and get started early and all. Now, there are charts for this, and we'll talk about it after the show, I'm sure. But that's something I would like to bring up.
Remember, Kenny's moving over that free.
Yeah, absolutely. So very much dependent on what you're planting, how long your season is. I think everyone shares the concern of trying to get that early, and then, has dealt with the heartbreak of seeing a frost kill those early plants. So great question from Anna on tool for measuring soil temperature. I also want to bring it back to something Justin mentioned in the chat about controlling seed pH levels. Anyone specifically monitor that for germination? I know, obviously it's a trade-off between kind of the precision and the intuition of what it looks like.
No, we don't monitor our soil pH levels. And I think the largest reason is that, we pretty much in the garden anyway, we have the soil that we have. You can make over time adjustments to pH, and ours isn't bad actually. We're like slightly on the alkaline side at 7.5. So we don't have really alkaline soils here like you might in some other areas. It's just a big flat sand pile, really. The I don't know what it's. Hold on one second here. Am I still there?
Yes, all good.
Okay, there we go. Soil that you have. So one of the things, and I learned this years and years ago when I worked as an arborist, there was a big thing about potted trees and having an ideal environment in those pots. And it's say take a 5-gallon pot, for instance, you're growing a London plane, which is a variety of sycamore. And so you have this beautiful soil in there, and something keeps popping up on my screen. There we go. We're back.
Apologies. I'm not sure who is.
But the idea in arboriculture, and I think the same thing holds true here, just in general horticultural practices, is that when you plant that, if you've created this beautiful soil environment in your pot, and then you plant it in our generally lousy Nevada soils by some comparison, that a lot of times those roots will go out and they'll hit that native soil and they won't want to go there. And so you still end up with a root bound plant in native soil because at least initially it thinks the best soil is where it currently sits. And so we would generally start trees in native soil and maybe have some rice hulls or vermiculite or something to hold more moisture in that pot so you don't have to water them as often. And then when you plant them, we would scarify the edge of the hole that we dug so that the roots don't have a round surface and they would have little angles to grow into and start growing into the native soil. And that actually, I think, applies here. We don't make our own potting soil anymore. But what I used to do, and it works great, if someone's looking for potting soil, go out and find where the gophers have dug in your garden. And we have them here because we're adjacent to some alfalfa fields. And they usually have excavated that soil out of their burrows. They push it up and it's below the profile of soil that has your seed bank. It's just good, clean soil, whatever kind you have. It's generally not got a lot of weeds. And then if you're doing seedlings, you can mix in some rice hulls or something to hold water, a little bit of compost or fertilizer if you're going to have them in there for a while. And then you're essentially, when you plant that seedling, you're planting it in the same environment in your as a start as it's going to go into when you plant. And there's it's a lot less shocking for the plant. If you have lousy dirt, you have to add fertilizer to the seedling and the dirt after you plant, or it's not going to thrive. But that's how we've approached the soil issue, is trying to plant in an environment that's as similar to our planting environment as we can, as far as organic material, soil pH. If you start with what you have, then you're not too far off track there, if that makes any sense.
That's a really great point. The reduction of the shock really strikes me as someone who has had so many seedlings die, because I think I get them from a farm that has really nice soil, yours or one of our local producers, and then I try to put them somewhere that they are not happy with. Ray, do you or the cat have anything to share?
Oh, oh boy. Um, I had to leave when Rob started talking, so I didn't catch all of his. Uh, but that was it. That's very interesting. And yeah, looking at that hole that vole digs, and looking at that soil, my God, that's just like seedling soil. It's that fine. It's amazing. I, he's bringing up things that I never, dreamed of. Uh, Thank you, Rob. Uh, I spend a lot of money on seedling soil and potting soil. Um, just because we always did it that way. So thank you for for the update on some of those things. I may try that this year. Uh, Sounds good to me.
That is why we are here. I want to bring up a point Daniel mentioned of covering seedlings, humidity domes. This does get back to sort of how Ray is talking about with putting it in the Tupperware to get it started, increasing that temperature. So it's always a balance that we are working to address here with creating those perfect conditions. Anyone have any experiences with covering, uncovering, um, seeing different results? Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit more about what that situation looks like?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a very temperature and humidity controlled germination room, because it took us, we built like 2 or 3 walk-in coolers, I think, before we started using them as walk-in coolers. So it's really well insulated and really controlled and everything. What we use to start our seeds. And that's just what we've noticed is, if the surface of the soil is uncovered in our trays, because we're starting everything, in the nice germination mix in trays right now. But we get many days faster germination if we can keep them covered. And we're reasonably certain that it's that evaporative cooling from the water evaporating off the top of the soil. You can stick your fingers on it and feel it, and it's just much cooler. You don't have to have humidity domes. We've also, we only have so many of them. We've also just thrown saran wrap over the top, or when we have the capability, we've also just stacked trays, and just keep an eye on when those seedlings are trying to poke through. But that works pretty much just as well. Is, on our shelves, we'll just stack the trays on top of one another, and they hold that moisture in. And you really notice it in any shallow planted seeds, but you have that cooling also in the cucumbers and the melons and the squash, the larger seeded plants, seem to respond the same way. Is just you get much faster germination, regardless of what we don't we have the ability to keep our air temperature really even, so we'll only keep it at maybe 75 degrees, but that provides all the heating we found we really need. And we don't use heat mats, but if you're using those heat mats, I do think that's something you want to pay attention to, because you could get a lot of cooling through that evaporation that's sort of counteracting your attempt to provide the warmth to the seeds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Any other points on this, or I was going to move on to sort of a secondary issue, active yeast. I've not seen that in, soil temperatures by using biologically active compost. That's a really interesting one. I've seen video of people who put their germination chamber next to their manure compost pile for the heat effects of that, but I've never seen or heard about that in the soil itself. We've got any thoughts on that? Or if not, I had wanted to ask how everyone manages pests, your biggest pest problems or your biggest pest solutions, because I know I've seen the damage wrought by whitefly or any of the rest. So if any of you have thoughts on that, always good time to be prepared.
I can add one thing quickly on the active compost. It does generate a lot of heat. And being a certified organic farm, it has to be compost and have gone through the so many days at such and such temperature before we can actually use it. And honestly, by the time it's compost, it's not generating the heat that it would have while it was actively compost. So we've but we have known of people who had compost piles in their high tunnels and used that as a heat source below their seedling things, and you have some logistical things getting those out of the way so you can turn your compost. But it is an excellent source of heat. Just in a certified organic environment, it's a little bit more difficult to capitalize on that heat because of the 90-120 day rule. If it hasn't gone through the whole composting process, it's still considered a raw product. So anyway, that's where we are on that. But I can, we don't have a lot of problems. Like Virginia, Lonnie is our seedling. We call her our seedling queen, and she's been out there doing her thing here in the last week or so, starting to get things ready and planted for some of our earlier plantings. The Daniel made just a really nice, fairly small room for her. Has a lot of food safe racks in there with seedling trays, and she likes it because it's nice and warm and bright, and she goes in there and does her thing. And as far as the pests, we've noticed, particularly with greens, if we overwater, then we'll get they fall over. It's a real simple term. I want to say it's nodding off, but that's what I do. It's not nodding off. It's damping off. We'll get damping off of our seedlings, and so you have to make sure you have some ventilation with little things like lettuce and kale when they first come up. But lettuce is the worst with damping off if it's too wet and too humid. And sometimes we'll end up with fungus gnats, not bad. And part of it, I think, is the humidity aspect and not letting it get too terrarium-like in that environment. And I think that ties in also with creating an environment that is more desirable for the plant, but is not a whole lot unlike the environment in your high tunnel where you're going to be planting it. You're just providing a little help early on for the seed to be comfortable and germinate and get started and make some roots before you actually put it in the ground. But damping off has been our biggest issue, and not using too much water or fertilizer early on in those stages will help reduce that.
Ray, do you have anything to add on the pest side of the equation?
The only thing I can add is, we ventilate our potting shed, with a ceiling, vent, and we also run a, fan in there while we have, the seed in underneath the lights, to grow. And, you talk about ventilation, that's one thing that I am very, very careful about. It just seems like if you don't ventilate enough, you're going to get your moisture build up.
And the pests definitely love the moisture, so
Yeah.
something to
Yeah,
consider.
it just, the moisture just kind of, builds in there if you don't have that ventilation. And sometimes you think, oh my God, this is too much air, it's getting too cold, but it's that keeping that air moving that really helps, that Rob's talking about on that. And all. I do want to add that Daniel was talking about covering his trays of seedlings. And he is absolutely correct. This is probably one of the most essential things when you have your seedlings in a seedling soil. You need to keep that tray covered until the starts pop up. So you see that little bit of green. Very, very important. So that's all I can add right now.
There we have it. I also just want to take this moment halfway through to let everyone know that Ray is going to be our keynote speaker at the Small Farms Conference that is happening this February. I just put a link in the chat. That's going to be in Sparks, Nevada at the Grand Sierra, or no, not Grand Sierra, Nugget. Sorry. I forgot where I was for a second. And Ray will be headlining that. So you can get all of this in person from the stage if you can join us there. So make sure if you can to try to. Moving on from pests, unless anyone questions or comments. Daniel, I did see a lot of nodding when Rob was talking about pest pressure. So if you have wisdom, hard-earned wisdom to share, please unmute and do.
I'm not sure I can add too much more on that, other than we've generally had a lot of success in trying to manage our nursery starts greenhouse the same way as we do with the high tunnels, in encouraging as many a really vibrant sort of ecosystem. So we do see early in the year we've got a ton of different kinds of parasitic wasps, and we've got a lot of hoverflies, ladybugs, things like that, that after several years of managing them come back on their own too. And it's that and turnover, just making sure we're getting stuff in on time and out on time, are the best things we've done for that. Fungus gnats are still a challenge. They're and the single best thing we've ever found for that is just trying our best not to overwater. And then spider mites are the other thing we occasionally encounter. And as soon as I figure out a good solution to those, I'll let everyone know, because that's a challenging one.
They really are, yeah.
You
Always
know,
by the end of the year, I just give up.
I can add one more thing on the pest control thing. Sometimes, when you're starting early or you're trying to go late, it's like those Brussels sprouts in early November. They're about the only green thing you have left, and every aphid in the country finds them. And in the springtime, we end up with, especially if we're trying to get started with beans or peas or larger seeds, invariably we have deer mice or field voles find their way in. They know what's nutritious as well, and they really like kale seedlings. Once you get 2 or 3 sets of leaves and about a 3-inch seedling, and you're thinking about putting it in the ground, and then you come in and you have a bunch of little short sticks. They don't waste their time with the stems, but they'll eat all those leaves off. And so that's something to watch for. It doesn't happen always. And sometimes you just have to run a trap line and get them out of there and then figure out how it is that they're getting in. Um, as long as they can get in, more will come. It's like the field of dreams for the rodent community. So you've got to have a good fence around the edge to keep these things out. And once you figure out how they got in, you can address it a lot more simply, because once they find it, they start coming and they bring their buddies. And I know last year we lost several trays of kale for 2 or 3 subsequent nights, and it just, ah, it's, they're just doing what God made them to do. You can't really be mad at them. You could just keep them out so they could do it somewhere else. And so anyway, just keep your eyes peeled for rodent holes, for sure.
Definitely kind of an underlying theme, the awareness, paying attention so that you can see issues early as they develop instead of waiting for something to overwhelm your situation is something that we're seeing throughout a lot of this situation. I had one more kind of do you, don't you quiz question survey on up potting. So I know a lot of people say, minimize the number of transplants, and then other people, especially here where we do have a colder season, letting them get larger in a 5-inch or 7-inch pot after you've started them. What are the thoughts? What are your suggestions? Or what's the context that makes one option better than the other?
Oh, Jordan. Okay. The thought process behind going through all the efforts of getting a transplant and, getting it, to grow and everything in a 4-inch pot, and getting it to that stage where it's pretty nice to just, go out and transplant that into the ground. I think what we've tried here over the years is we've tried direct seeding of things, and we've tried, going transplant. And it seems to me that in the transplant process, you have probably a 98% chance of that plant living and producing. And when you're direct seeding, the chances of that seed germinating and coming up and producing a plant, a plant that will produce, is, I don't know what. I can't put a percentage on it, but I can tell you one thing. time is of essence in getting our crops in the ground. And by doing transplants, I have a plant that I feel is 98% going to produce for me, and I can get it in the ground and without taking any extra chances of the seed not germinating or something else happening. And that to me is dollars and cents. That's
Absolutely.
probably the only reason why we do transplants, because it makes more sense. Direct seed to ground is one heck of a lot easier. It really is.
Sure. Daniel, you had a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to add on. I just would start out with, my life would be so much easier if I could learn lessons from Ray instead of having to make those mistakes myself, for one thing. But I would second everything that he said. We've found to be exactly true as well. But we have been experimenting with this exact same problem because, our especially our long season indeterminate crops, we're the same way. We're transplanting almost everything. We're starting them inside and transplanting so that we get the right populations. And we just have really bad germination if we try direct seeding a lot of those crops, or at least not acceptable germination levels. One of the things we discovered this past year that was incredibly helpful was we found some 38 cell deep trays that we tried some of our peppers in as an experiment. So they're 5.5 inch. They're basically the same kind you would normally use for starting trees or for rooting in cuttings of woody plants like that. So very deep. And we just tried germinating our seeds in directly in those. And that was incredibly helpful. So they're able to spend, for our peppers, we're trying to start our seeds about 8 weeks before transplanting, and our tomatoes 6 weeks. And we were able to keep the peppers in that entire time without them becoming root bound. They will come out a little bit skinnier because they're still close enough together that they're not going to branch out quite as much as if they had the kind of elbow space they do in those 4-inch pots. But we were able to avoid having to up pot those into the larger size pots. We are planting them into the heavy duty landscape fabric with the holes burned in it as well. And those smaller cell sizes are so much easier to plant in there than the big 4-inch pots that we were having to squeeze down to just try and get them to fit in the hole. And then, like I said, that other part of they were not getting root bound or severely overgrown. We weren't having any of those issues. And so we're going to be doing that for all of our tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, the kinds of things that we want to be bigger plants and that don't suffer as much from transplant shock. We're still going to be using the smaller trays and really trying to get things in the ground in a timely manner when it comes to the cucumbers, melons, squash. But for the tomatoes and peppers, that was incredibly helpful.
It's fascinating. Everyone talks about like root depth as a component of plant strength. So it does sort of make sense intuitively that letting them have that deeper growing environment is going to be helpful. Oh, Danielle had a question. The size of the pots, I think you said they were 5.5 inches deep. So it's a narrower, taller unit.
Correct. And I'll look up the ones that we bought really quick and post a link.
Ah, sweet. Thank you so much.
Hey, Jordan, while he's looking that link up, I can go back to I think Monica had a observation that she heard about worm tea helping with aphids. And I think especially in a seedling environment, it would, and that ties in with a conversation that the Lot Speech family and I had last week, is when a plant is healthy and has good micronutrients and minerals in its diet, as well as just your regular big three, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. But when it has all those micronutrients at good healthy levels, then that plant is more resistant to and not as appealing to a weaker plant that is good. And I think that's why worm tea would be helpful with aphid control, is because worm tea has a lot of the micronutrients out of the soil, and it's essentially, whether you're irrigating with it or using it as a foliar, it would be similar to a mineral drench. And so often our diets and plant diets are deficient in something. And so I think, to answer your question there, yes, it does help. And I think that it took me a while to catch on last week when Dan brought it up, but I've known hay farmers in Fallon that have had good luck inoculating their fields, so to speak, with a mineral drench, and have had a lot less aphid and alfalfa weevil infestations in those inoculated fields. And that would be similar to using worm tea. It wouldn't be practical to use worm tea on a hayfield, but it certainly is in a seedling environment or a garden environment. And I think that the end result would be the same: healthier, more resistant, less desirable plants to the pests.
Thank you for sharing that, Rob. I really appreciate the context of, thinking about this as the whole ecosystem of the plants, whether it's the beneficials that were brought up, or the micro biology of the soil and its environment. All of those are contributing factors that are going to be important to improving that success.
Well, that's really kind of the foundation for it. Our soils are largely inadequate for good, healthy plant growth. So we've got to help the plants prosper, and a good, broad-reaching fertilization plan that addresses those micronutrients as well as the NPK are absolutely necessary, and they will. We have to help our plants by helping our soils first, because it's our lack of water relatively that results in soils that are pretty deficient. And so you got to start at the bottom of that ladder and work your way up with irrigation and with soil health to have healthy plants.
Sure, I just sort of hit me. Bacteria, microbiology, all of those are filled with water. And so when you're talking about what improves the water content of the soil, it's not having more rocks, it's having more organic material. So yeah, thank you for bringing it back to the biology. Any questions? I think that those were my topics. If anyone has any other issues or areas. If not, I do also want to just put another plug in for the Business Builder grant that the Regional Food Business Center is launching. And so again, this is to provide funding for farm businesses, farm enterprises, for everything outside of production. So the value added, the transportation, the coordination, marketing, issues like that. And so the link to that is in the chat. Do either of our farm apprentices have any questions relative to what y'all have been doing or planning? Can I put them on the spot? No.
I'll say something.
Thank you, Monica.
This is my favorite topic, but I wanted to say one funny thing that I saw the other day on a Johnny's seed bag for grow, just like instructions. it said should be easy to grow if you have good soil, and it just made me laugh because I was like, oh,
Yeah,
so if you can't get this to grow, you're an idiot, essentially. I was like, wow, that's kind of insulting. I'm gonna try to grow it. But also wanted to say that Louis, obviously he has like a worm pit, and he is gonna soak the seeds in worm wine this year before he
I've
plants it.
heard that used in other places, so I'm very curious about how that works. So we'll wait for updates on that. Good question for Jeff. For those of you that start indoor, can you leave grow lights on 24 hours a day? I've heard that that's not recommended. You have to do like an 18/6 for most plants, but any thoughts from our Farm Talk team?
Jordan, I don't know where they came up with that number, 18/6, but
I heard it on the internet. I'm probably wrong.
well, it works. That's exactly what I use. Probably a little less than 18, probably closer to 16, uh, and all. But that time that you shut those lights down is just as important as the time you have the lights on, in my mind, for the seed and the plant to receive the amount of light that they need to grow and keep that soil as warm as possible during that time. Of course, during the dark time, your soil will cool down somewhat, but not as much as you might think.
Especially not if you keep it covered.
Yeah, that's where I guess the covering comes in, and so that kind of works.
Justin, did you have a question?
I just had a comment on that. I find that it depends greatly on the plant that you're growing. If you're doing something that has lots of produce like peppers or tomatoes that you're expecting larger produce out of, shorter sun time, light time is much more beneficial. I've studied with a couple 50,000 or so starts that the 16-hour is kind of where you want to go, or you spend too much energy from the plant in the growth stages before it gets production. And in my experience, it slowed production quite a bit.
Right, so 16/8. We're getting some nods, some thumbs up. So
Yeah,
it is interesting. Yeah, please, Rob.
I can add to that too. What a lot of people don't realize, everybody knows that plants will take and capture solar energy, and they'll photosynthesize and store carbohydrates. But at the same time, at night when it's dark, in the daytime they photosynthesize, and at night they respirate, and they'll break down those carbohydrates and make the food that they need. It's why a lot of times you see in the morning, you'll see a fish kill where fish will go in, they'll move into an area at night, and if there's a lot of algae beds and they get stuck in there at night, when that algae reverses and starts respirating, it's just like us, it consumes oxygen, and so those fish will end up in an oxygen deprived environment, and they're dead, all like boom. And so it's important for plants to have a period of darkness, and I would agree on the time frame that we've talked about. Again, that's Lonnie's deal, and she works with our son Daniel to set the timers so that we don't have to go out at 11 or 10. But if the light's still on at 10 and the timer didn't work, we'll go out and turn them off. And so the breakdown is probably about the same, and you can even see that manifest if you go like to part of it's that it's cooler and more humid. But if you go to Montana and places north, and you look at the size of the rhubarb and the size of the cabbages that they grow, those long periods of daylight at northern latitudes grow monster vegetables. But they still have to have a period of at least reduced light to actually utilize those sugars that they're manufacturing in the daytime. So it's important to have both.
Thank you. Any other questions on nursery propagation starts? We didn't cover. Oh, Anna, please.
I just saw in the comments, have any of you tried using willow water as a like fertilizer type nutrient watering?
We just did that the other day here. I think with Lance, if I'm not mistaken, he did, or they did a willow tree wine essentially with white and red leaves for it's like a rooting hormone essentially on peach, desert peach, choke cherries, and elderberries. So,
I have seen that brought up as a inoculation approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a lavender farmer, and that's kind of something that when we're propagating lavender, that seems to help. But I've had as much luck with that as just the regular growth hormone, you know, the growth, you know what I'm saying? The root. Yeah.
Terrific. Great. Thank you. You know, I think a lot of this is about finding what works for the plant that you're growing. So last pitch for questions. This is the first time we've gone under. But thank you all so much. I'm just going to make one more pitch for the Small Farm Conference, February 22nd, 23rd. I believe those are the dates. I'll have to in Sparks, Nevada. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Really predictive, really fantastic discussion today. Hope everyone starts to do well. Hope no one gets fungus gnats because that's such a nightmare. I really do appreciate all of you joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, 2 weeks. Awesome. Thank you.
Good to see you all.